We think of Vikings as raiders with axes and long ships, but that's only the flashy part. The real horror didn't happen on the battlefield. It started after the fighting stopped. When the men lay dead, the women, wives, mothers, daughters, faced something far worse than death. In Repton, they found nearly 300 bodies from the Viking Wars, including women and children. So, were they captives? Or were they daughters killed by their own fathers so raiders couldn't take them alive? Dark, right? And it gets darker. This isn't the Viking story you've heard in movies, and trust me, the final detail in this video will leave you speechless. If you value documented Viking history told without the Hollywood filter, subscribe now. It helps us keep uncovering the dark truths of the past. And comment below, which city are you watching from? Now, back to the story. You know what nobody tells you? When a Viking raid ended, the screaming didn't stop. Sure, the men were dead, bodies cut down in the mud, but for the daughters left alive? That's when the real terror began. Think about it. You're 15, maybe 16, hiding behind a burned hut. Your father's lying in the street, your brother's cut down with him. Then rough hands grab you, drag you out by the hair, and suddenly you're property. That's not drama. That's how the law worked. The law back then? Straight up insane. If you killed a man, you could literally claim his wife or daughter on the spot. Boom. She wasn't seen as a person anymore, just property. They even had a word for it. Kona, which basically means owned woman. Owned. Not loved, not respected. Owned. Can you imagine hearing that about yourself? And this wasn't a one-off horror story. Archaeologists keep digging up proof. Shackles at Dublin's slave market small enough to fit children. Iron ankle rings found in York that could only hold skinny teenage girls. The monks who wrote the chronicles? They go silent right here. They describe the bloodshed, but when it comes to the women, the ink runs dry. Maybe they didn't dare to put it in words. But the bones and the chains still speak. So here's the brutal part nobody likes to say. Daughters weren't just stolen, they were priced. Cold numbers. In Dublin's slave market, a young girl was worth about 20 silver coins, the same price as a good war horse. Imagine that. To them, a teenage girl and a horse were the same kind of purchase. And if she was hurt, discounted. That's how cold it was, like haggling over livestock. That's not gossip. It's written in runic inscriptions found in Schleswig, actual receipts carved into stone. Dublin, York, even Birka in Sweden turned into hubs of human trade. At Wood Quay in Dublin, they even found storage houses. But not for grain or cattle. Nope, these were for people. Iron rings in the beams to hold chains, drains cut into the floor, and not for rainwater. They were basically human warehouses, crammed full like cargo. And the thing is, this wasn't a side hustle for Vikings. It was an industry. Ships came in weekly, sometimes carrying 20 or 30 women each. Some sent west to Iceland, others east down the Russian rivers to markets as far as Baghdad. The scale is insane. We're not talking about a handful of unlucky captives. We're talking thousands, generation after generation, treated like coinage. The dirt doesn't lie. Dig anywhere around Viking ports like Dublin or Hedeby and you'll find chains, some so tiny it's sickening. Ankle rings that only a 10-year-old could squeeze into. Wrist shackles the size of a modern child's bracelet. Excavations at Wood Quay in Dublin alone turned up dozens, and they matched descriptions in Arabic sources that talk about Norse traders selling young girls pale as snow in markets as far as Baghdad. Think about that. Viking ships weren't just loaded with silver chalices and stolen cattle. They carried human cargo, children included. Archaeologists call it portable wealth. Easier to move than livestock, more profitable than timber. One girl could be sold 3 times over. Captured in Ireland, resold in York, marched east to Kiev, then shipped again to the Caliphate. Every stop made money for someone. And the scale wasn't small. Some estimates say tens of thousands of captives were trafficked through Dublin between the 9th and 11th centuries. And the child-sized shackles are the most chilling proof. You don't make iron restraints that small unless you need them, a lot of them. And that's the part that makes your stomach turn. These weren't rare one-off cases. This was routine. The law spelled it out plain as day. A defeated warrior's daughter wasn't just unlucky. She became property, as legal as a cow or a sword. They weren't subtle about it either. The word was kona, literally owned woman, and this wasn't some rare thing. It's written right into Viking law books. All a guy had to do was say in front of 3 buddies, within 3 days, she's mine now. And just like that, she was his wife. No choice, no voice, done. Consent wasn't even a concept in this system. And it gets colder. If that woman tried to end her life to escape, her family owed the captor compensation. Suicide wasn't freedom, it was theft of property. The fine? 40 silver marks. That's more than an average free man earned in a year, all for a daughter who had no agency over her own fate. The sagas don't glamorize this, they sidestep it. But the laws are brutal receipts. Archaeology backs it up too. Isotopes from graves at Repton and York show women buried far from their homelands, legitimized as wives only because their captors said a few magic words in public. The system didn't just allow sexual violence, it legalized it. When Dublin was retaken from Norse control in 914, the Irish annals bragged about victory, cattle taken back, churches freed. But they stayed silent on what they found outside the walls. Archaeologists later uncovered the punishment pits, 6 feet deep, 3 feet across, just big enough to crouch, too small to stand, too shallow to lie flat. Inside, women's skeletons with broken legs and arms deliberately smashed to stop escape or even suicide. This wasn't a quick death. Soil analysis from those pits shows slow decomposition, days, sometimes weeks before death. Some pits had standing water, meaning victims drowned inch by inch. Others had sharp stones, tearing skin every time someone shifted. Viking law codes confirm it. A slave woman who resisted or harmed her master was buried alive. And this wasn't symbolic. It was a message. Captives were forced to watch, so they knew exactly what would happen if they fought back. It's the kind of cruelty that doesn't make it into sagas, because who wants to sing about burying girls alive? But the bones don't lie. The pits proved defiance wasn't just punished, it was turned into theater. A slow, public agony designed to break everyone's will. Repton, 873 AD. The great heathen army made its winter camp here after crushing mercy and resistance. When archaeologists opened the ground, they uncovered a chilling sight. A mass grave of more than 250 bodies. Most of them young men, Viking warriors. But scattered around the camp were something the chronicles never mention. The remains of women and children, out of place, out of context, buried hastily without honor. And that silence in the written record raises a darker question. Whose daughters were they? Were they captives taken during the campaign? Or worse, were they Norse-born women, wives and daughters killed by their own people when defeat loomed, so they would never face capture? We can't say for certain, but we know how the Vikings treated the daughters of their enemies, as property, as currency, as spoils of war. And if they had inflicted those horrors on others for years, then perhaps in their darkest moments, they believed killing their own was a kind of mercy. That possibility, that a father could look his daughter in the eyes and decide death was better than life in Viking captivity, flips the Viking image completely on its head. When scientists dug into Iceland's DNA, they uncovered something brutal. About 60% of the female ancestry traces back to Celtic women, Irish, Scottish, and Welsh, while over 80% of the male ancestry is Scandinavian. That imbalance screams one thing: Viking men were raiding the British Isles, stealing daughters and dragging them back across the North Atlantic. This isn't speculation, and DNA doesn't lie. It's literally written into modern bloodlines, a record of kidnapping you can't erase. The stuff moms pass down to their kids shows exactly where the women came from. And trust me, it wasn't from some Viking love story. It was abduction, plain and simple, on a massive scale. That gap doesn't happen by accident. It happens when women are captured and forced into Norse households, and the sagas quietly admit it. Laxdela Saga and Landnama Bok mention Irish slaves and bondwomen taken west. But the bones tell the darker truth. Archaeologists in Icelandic farmsteads find women buried with no family goods, no kinship markers, likely captives buried among strangers. So when you hear about Iceland's Viking founders, remember, the bloodlines were built on violence, raids, and women taken against their will. Every modern Icelander's DNA carries that legacy, whether they like it or not. The archaeology doesn't lie. Wrecks pulled from the North Sea show Viking ships weren't just for raiding. They were built to carry people, tightly packed, like cargo. Some of these longships had reinforced compartments below deck with ventilation shafts, water storage, and crossbeams modified to anchor iron rings. Those rings weren't for barrels, they were for chains. Timber dating puts one of the biggest of these ships around 912. It could carry 80 captives, mostly women, chained side by side. Think about that, 80 bodies packed into a dark hold, no light, minimal air, weeks at sea. Burn marks show that particular ship went down in a storm or a raid, and all 80 captives died with it. Their skeletons never washed ashore. The Arabic chroniclers back it up. They describe Viking caravans bringing white-skinned women from the west all the way down the Volga, sold as luxuries in markets as far as Baghdad. Runic ship manifests even list slaves alongside furs and amber with numbers. 20 women per ship was considered standard cargo. 80 meant a supersized load, so when people romanticize Viking longships, they picture dragons on the prow. What they don't picture is the dungeon below deck, the real engine of profit. When archaeologists dug under York, they didn't find treasure. They found 64 tiny stone cells, each one barely big enough to lie down in. And no, they weren't for animals or storage, they were for women. Each cell measured less than 2 meters long and barely 1 wide. Too small for livestock, too regular for storage. The layout screams confinement. What makes it darker? Isotopic tests on bones found nearby show many were young women, not locals, but from Celtic and Anglo-Saxon backgrounds. Their diet shifted after captivity, less variety, more grains, signs of malnutrition. Historians now argue these cells were used as a holding and breeding facility. designed to produce children who could be sold as thralls or absorbed into Viking households. Written sources back it up. The Domesday Book, 1086, still recorded large slave populations in York a century after the Viking Age, proving the practice had deep roots. Even saga references to friller, secondary wives, or concubines hint at the blurred line between partner and captive. It's easy to forget, but York was the Viking capital in England for almost 90 years. Behind its markets and shipyards ran an economy that relied on women locked in those stone cells, their children seen as profit before they were even born. You know what really hits hardest? The sagas brag about warriors splitting skulls and raiding kingdoms, but when it came to women, they went quiet. That silence isn't because nothing happened. It's because what happened was too ugly to glorify. The Vikings left scars that bones, blood, and DNA still scream about today. And trust me, this was just one piece of the nightmare. If you want more brutal truths, stay with us. Our next video dives even deeper